Good morning. We'll get started in just a moment. Morning. Get started in just a second. Hey, good morning, Sunnyvale. Welcome to my weekly virtual office hours, and welcome to Friday the 13th for those superstitious people out there. This week's early artwork is another mural from my holiday travels in Bend. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see the octopus that was on one of the murals in downtown Bend, and it was actually kind of interesting. It was an alley that was full of murals, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to get done here in Sunnyvale, is trying to fill up some of our alleyways downtown with some murals to add some color, add some artwork. And if you're cutting through, there's no reason why it shouldn't at least be be a beautiful place within the city. So let's see if we can get that done. But yeah, I thought that was a very colorful and beautiful piece of work, actually. Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thank you for joining me again this week. This is the 147th installment of my weekly virtual office hours. Hope that everyone is doing well, staying healthy, staying dry this week. The last few weeks have been very stormy, with more to come over the next week. We've now reached 1,033 days since the March 16, 2020 county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. Almost 3 years ago now, I converted my weekly coffee shop office hours into this weekly live stream address. And, unless we talk about the week that I was under surgery, I haven't missed a week since. But people still say they appreciate hearing from their mayor each week, whether or not they're watching me live or watching this video delayed by days or sometimes weeks. But it allows me to, reach a lot more people than I would at my standard coffee shop hours. It also, allows me to give you some updates of what's happening in our city, give you some words of encouragement, and then, just give you a better lay of the land of where our city is going. So thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. Most Fridays like today, I follow up this live stream session with in-person meetings at Bean Scene on Murphy Avenue. So if you would like to reserve 15 minutes or 30-minute time slot, just email me, and we can figure out how to best meet up and how to slice up that time. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. For the last few weeks, the District 3 election has been in the news. And so, it was good last Tuesday morning. That District 3 election ultimately ended up in a tie. And so there was a tiebreaker last Tuesday morning at City Hall, and it was attended by about 50 residents and staff members and all that. It was televised on Zoom, and both candidates, so Merle Srinivasan and Justin Wang, put their names on a sheet of paper and in an envelope. The envelopes went into a bag. The bags were then shaken by both candidates, and then the city clerk ultimately drew a name, and that final name, of course, was Merle Srinivasan. So happy to welcome him to council. It was definitely as far as an election standpoint, one for the Sunnyvale history books. But ultimately, I think, both candidates were good. But, I do definitely think that Murley will represent a portion of our community, being the first Indian council member. But he's had lots of ties, and I think all of our district candidates, and I'll talk about that, later in just a few moments, as we swore the new district council members in last Tuesday evening. They've all given back in lots of ways in the community. And then, so let's move on to that. That Tuesday evening was actually very ceremonial from a city standpoint. We did lots of electeds from around the Bay Area came to thank our outgoing council members. Councilmember Gustav Larson had been on the council for 9 years. Former mayor Glenn Hendricks had been on council for 9 years, and especially Glenn Hendricks had been chair of the VTA board during the 2021 shooting, so the mass shooting that happened there. So he had dealt with a lot of issues, and this is one of the things, from a council standpoint, you represent your city, you represent your residents, and go to council meetings. You also go to lots of you have lots of other intergovernmental responsibilities, IGRs, and he was chair of VTA, which meant he was front and center when all that happened, basically comforting the families and trying to, forge a way ahead with that staff. And so not an easy task. And he did it very well, and, and was not an easy thing for him. I've talked to him about that multiple times, and hearing what he went through was not a fun thing to be, but he showed strength, he showed leadership, and to me that was the best thing. And then we also thanked Tony Spitaleri, former mayor who'd served on council previously for 8 years, but came back to fill out the term that was vacated by Mason Fong last year, when Mason resigned from council. So we appointed Tony last February, and he filled out the rest of that term. So we thank them. And then, of course, we welcomed a lot of the new council members. So as far as, we talked about District 3, which was Murli Srinivasan, District 1, which is the southwest corner of Sunnyvale, was Linda Sell, who we appointed earlier last year, when she was the only qualified candidate that filled out all the paperwork. We appointed Linda and saved the city, $20,000. And then Richard Mellinger, which is part of District 5, which it goes from the Caltrain tracks to 101. So all three candidates have been giving back to the city for many years, on the city boards and commissions, and lots of other nonprofits and other advocacy. So happy to see them join on council. Ultimately, we've moved to districts over the last 5 years, and moving to districts has given us the most diverse council that Sunnyvale has ever had. So very, very happy to see that, and looking forward to what this next year brings. Later in the evening, we did have some, it wasn't just pomp and circumstance. We did actually have some things to do. We chose our next vice mayor. And so vice mayor is normally a 1-year term of the most senior council member that's sitting on the dais. And so Councilmember Dean was chosen as our vice mayor. We also did some, we chose a lot of IGRs and intergovernmental responsibilities, and we also chose our seating on the dais. So it was a long evening, lots of people came to speak, and from that standpoint, it was actually very good to be back in person and having the council chambers filled for the first time in probably at least 4 years. So it was good to see everyone, and good to see some old friends that I hadn't seen for a while. And then last Wednesday and Thursday, very stormy days, within within Sunnyvale, within California. We definitely need the rain. There are lots of flooding and power outages around the Bay Area. Sunnyvale was, of course, in pretty good shape. And then last Wednesday in the morning, Governor Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency around California to support the upcoming and ongoing recent storm warnings that we've had. And lots of cities are still recovering. Los Gatos, Saratoga actually declared a local state of emergency because of flooding and conceivable mudslides and trees. That emergency proclamation actually supports relief efforts, including, mobilizing the California National Guard, and it also gives us a certain amount of federal funding, which is critical for recovery and making sure that, whatever has been damaged, we actually have availability to make sure that, things are repaired. And then last Friday, a week ago, Governor Newsom was sworn in as his second term as governor. And so there was a lot of, basically a parade down Sacramento before that. And it was a relatively short speech, kind of laying out, and it was done on January 6th to do a call back to what happened at the Capitol 2 years ago. And so ultimately, it was basically focusing on freedom and making sure that people were well represented, and that transition of power is clear. And then on Monday and Tuesday of this week, we had a lot more heavy rains, and definitely we had a few tree falling, few trees that fell. Definitely the ground is soaked right now. And so hopefully we don't have too much winds this weekend, because that's part of the issue of some of the trees falling over, because the root system and the ground next to the root system is so soaked. So keep our fingers crossed as far as what's happening over the next week. But the biggest tree I think that affected Sunnyvale was a large fir tree that fell on Matilda and blocked that for several hours Tuesday midday. So, and I heard from lots of residents on, what happened there, and, trying to get it back on, trying to get things back going from a city standpoint, but his staff jumped on it immediately. Public safety was out there helping divert traffic. So it worked out well, but wasn't an easy sort of thing, to say the least. And luckily, no one was injured. And then during the day on Tuesday, Governor Newsom laid out his new budget. He's proposing to cut billions of dollars from climate spending and delay funding of major programs to balance what's estimated at a $22.5 billion deficit. If tax revenues don't rebound, and looking at the potential recession, and looks like there won't be as many startup companies going public. It's most likely a down year for California. But yeah, the governor proposed a $297 billion budget. And it's kind of in stark difference with, it was a $310 billion budget last year. So it's down only about 10 billion. But there's deficits. There's also, unprecedented, last year we had an unprecedented $100 billion surplus. So we'll see what happens. Our revenues are estimated to be about $29.5 billion less this year, but it could be worse depending upon what's happening with the economy and what's happening with inflation and everything else. And then Tuesday evening, council met. We had our official swearing in for our new vice mayor, and also we had honored our last vice mayor, Alyssa Cisneros. So we thanked Omar Dean for and he's District 6 council member, so he's the most northern district in the city, but he offered to take on that role, and we chose him the previous week. We did that official swearing in, and I think he is the youngest vice mayor that we've ever had in the city's history. So pretty amazing from that standpoint, and representing South Asian representatives in our city. But I think in general, I've been impressed already that he's kind of taking control and, making sure that helping the mayor run meetings smoothly. And yeah, we honored Alyssa Cisneros for her term as vice mayor last year. She was actually the first one to chair an in-person meeting. We had a study session back in beginning of December. That was our first real meeting. But happy that she was there to represent Sunnyvale and help out the mayor over the last year. And then we had several other things on the agenda. We approved the zoning amendment regarding Block 20. And so there are several properties. And so Block 20 is the block along Matilda on the east side of Matilda, between Olive and El Camino Real. And so that location is ultimately, a mixture of housing and office space. And so what council ultimately did was let me make sure I get this right. What council ultimately did was, increase the number of residential units that were allowed there. They also increased the square footage, and it's walking distance to downtown. It's as far as it's walking distance to downtown and ultimately actually really close to a lot of things as far as public transportation and all that. So it's actually a great opportunity to add mixed use. And I think that's the important thing, is making sure that we continue to have a mixture of office and retail, and housing all within downtown. And so that's one of the things that we were looking at as far as wanting to approve. I didn't actually get to vote on it because I had recused myself. This is one of the things that the FPPC, so, basically from a state standpoint, if you live too close to a project, and I live within 1,000 feet of that project, you don't get to rule on it because it conceivably changes the value of your property. And so that's one of the things that I would have preferred to have a say, but wasn't actually able to do anything as far as that's concerned. But totally understandable. And council did the right thing, I think, in my opinion, as far as approving additional density there. But I have no control as far as that's concerned. And then we also approved the preferred concept for the community center grounds renovation. So this is at the community center, and it's about just over 4 acres, where the pond is, where the community building is, and the senior center. The community center was built in 1972, and then the senior center was added in 2003. And ultimately, the design was reducing the upper fountain, so where the memorial fountain is, by about 50%, and then we kind of reoriented it. We also on the lower pond, where it's the lower pond is about 19% of that whole 14 acres currently. And so right now, the goal, or after doing lots of public outreach, that people wanted less pond and more active spaces, we ultimately decided to reduce that by 60%. And then we added, active areas. We've added playgrounds, for actually 2 different playgrounds, one for ages 2 to 5 and one for ages 5 to 12. Actually, I think I can share the quick overview, so just people can see kind of what the orientation looks like. Let me do that very, very quickly. And ultimately, for that standpoint, you see a much smaller pond at the bottom, and then the orientation for the fountain at the top, very much different. But there will be playgrounds here. There'll be conversion of a lot of the turf into either bark, adding lots of trees. So we're adding a lot more trees. We're making sure that the heritage oak is still protected to a large degree. And then we're also adding a little bit of artificial turf, so kind of a mixture. So making sure that we're trying to reduce water usage at that site. Also, we're improving kind of electric usage. We're adding a bathroom. We're also one of the things that we're also doing, so we're adding an amphitheater that will be here next to the water. So lots of opportunities to better utilize the site in the long run. And then also as far as next to the water, making sure that there aren't any green spaces immediately adjacent to kind of hopefully reduce the number of geese that are there. I think that's one of the things that people mostly complain about, is trying to make sure, trying to deal with the geese issue, which I think is always, a problem. Let's go ahead and stop sharing. And then I think that was it for our Tuesday night meeting. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly COVID numbers. COVID numbers continue to trend downward, so that's actually very positive from a national standpoint. Even though we went through the holidays, we haven't seen hospitalizations increase. They've been about the same for the last month when it really comes down to it. From a national standpoint, we've now reached 101 million cases. We've increased about another 500,000 in the last week. We've had 225 million, more than 2/3 of the population vaccinated. Almost 79% of adults are fully vaccinated. 81% of those that are available for the vaccine have at least received one shot. So, of all ages, it's actually very good. We still have people passing away with COVID. It's up about 3,000 in the last week. So 1,095,000 cases of people passing away with COVID. And then, from a California standpoint, things keep trending downward. So that's actually really positive. We've had 10,972,000 positive cases, so we will pass 11 million cases in the next week. We continue to see a decrease in the average daily new cases, so we're now having 5,700 cases a day. That's down from 6,200 last week, 6,800, 7,400. It was over 8,000 a month ago, 8,000 new cases a day. So that's actually very positive. The test case positivity is down to 9%. So only 9% of those that get tested 9% of those being tested are showing positive. And then we still have people passing away, another 300 deaths in the last week. So over 98,000 fatalities. From a state standpoint, and then the county, we're have a cumulative case count now of almost 467,000 cases. That's up only or less than 2,000 in the last week. So we're seeing, county-wide numbers drop dramatically. We've had 16 deaths related to COVID, 2,584 deaths, and then vaccinations. We have over 95% of those adults 18 and older are fully vaccinated, and over 70% of those that are eligible for the booster have received at least one booster. I spend a lot of time advocating on our city's behalf at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level, and talking to our county supervisors. If you need to get tested, you can go to secfreetest.org. You can also order, tests from the federal government and have them delivered directly to your home. If you go to COVIDtests, tests.gov. And then as far as getting vaccinated, you can go to secfreevax.org to find out all the locations. There's a Wednesday pop-up every Wednesday afternoon at the Columbia Neighborhood Center. But lots of places around the county to get your test or to get your vaccine or get your booster. Let me announce some of the upcoming events. So on Saturday, tomorrow, Daruma Dojo at 548 South Murphy Avenue. We'll be having their grand opening celebration. So this is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So there'll be free classes and demonstrations for kids and adults from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So if you're downtown and have always wanted to try it, or get better some demonstration on self-defense, definitely go by. I'll be dropping by there also. Monday, of course, is Martin Luther King Day. City offices will be closed, the library will be closed, so definitely keep that in mind. And then a week from now, the next weekend, the Friends of the Sunnyvale Library will be having their book sale Saturday and Sunday. So normal hours 10 to 3 and noon to 3 on Sunday, and with the book bag sale, of course. And then at the following Wednesday, so Wednesday the 25th, we'll be having our Sunnyvale Sustainability Speaker Series. And that will be happening that Wednesday, the 25th, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. online. And it'll be Dr. Sarah Tabor, who is a crop scientist and a food safety consultant, and she'll be sharing her knowledge about the farm sector and the agricultural industry. So definitely lots of things happening in the city for the rest of January, and lots of upcoming council meetings. So next Tuesday, there will be a joint meeting, and this will be an online Moffett Park specific plan workshop. That'll be happening at 7 p.m. and it'll be only online, but it's comments on the Moffett Park specific plan, EIR, and kind of other areas or other things, other feedback that you would like staff to look at as we approve, as we look at approving that specific plan and that EIR, that environmental impact report. So looking at traffic, looking at the environment, looking at everything. And then on Tuesday, so the following Tuesday, January 24th, we'll be looking at approving, council will be looking at approving the Nexus study to change our housing impact fee on non-residential developments. So for every office building built, a certain square footage, there's a cost per every square foot that developer pays to make sure that we have that goes into a housing mitigation fund that we then reapply to all the nonprofit affordable housing developments within the city. So it's one of the things that the impact of office space, one of the several things, so, we do housing mitigation fees and traffic mitigation fees, as well as park dedication fees. So looking at trying to improve the city as we add office space, as we upgrade Class C sites to Class A sites. We'll also be looking at approving our community and neighborhood grant proposals for 2023 that night. And so that's one of the big things as far as funding, National Night Out within the neighborhoods or other projects, and then funding some of the bigger events like the Art and Wine Festival and, the summer series downtown. So all that is partial funded from the city. And then that same Thursday, January 26th, we have our all-day strategic session, and that will, that's one of 3 all-day meetings that council has every year. That sets our kind of strategy. That gives an overview of where the city stands at the beginning of the year. It's always an interesting sort of thing, and it'll be hybrid. It'll be, in person and online for those who want to attend, or want to watch it even after the effect. But ultimately, we'll go through kind of what the strategic priorities are for the city. Ultimately set our priorities, as well as have a open discussion on several topics, including, economic development, housing, recycled water, some of the main targets of what we're going to be looking at over the next few years. And then the following Tuesday, January 31st, we'll have a special Moffett Park specific plan community benefits workshop talking about prioritizing the community benefits that we would like to see as we, develop Moffett Park. So lots going on from a council standpoint. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have a question, please add it to the comments, and hopefully I'll be able to see it. It doesn't always work, but I'll get to it next week if I can't. David asked what happened with the water spout at Murphy Avenue last weekend. So a delivery truck actually backed into a fire hydrant, and Luckily, DPS was able to track them down. They didn't stop. They decided to keep moving. It took about almost 2 hours to turn off the water and, basically cap that portion of the line. But yeah, there was a big water spout. If you've seen photos or video, was pretty amazing as far as that's concerned. But yeah, it took public safety or Public Works a while to turn it off. It also took public safety to make sure that we figure out whose fault it was. So thanks to both of those teams, both of those city staff teams. Frida asked, wondering if you have any insight on what is going into the old McDonald's building on El Camino at Bernardo. I hadn't seen that they had actually, I know that I had heard that there were several different companies that were interested, several different businesses in utilizing that space, but I hadn't heard that they finally started developing it. I'll follow up with staff and figure that out. Allison asked, yesterday the Corp Yard was almost out of sandbags. Has it been restocked? So yes, staff is closely monitoring and making sure that the sandbags and the sand are there. And it's there year round, but especially available during the rainy season. So far, we've distributed more than 3,000 pre-filled sandbags. So, and then there's about another 900 sandbags that are ready to be issued. There's also piles of sand and empty burlap bags for self-service if they actually ran out. But the city's purchased more than 60 cubic yards of sand for storm preparation. So we're, on top of it as much as we can be. Definitely it's that rainy season and sandbags are needed by some people. Andrea asked, what is the artwork behind me or behind you? You didn't mention it last week. Yeah, so I'm waiting for my restock from the Sunnyvale Art Club. That's actually a piece of art that I did of our dog Buddy. And so definitely waiting for it. You can see a photo of Buddy off in the corner on the bookshelf. But yeah, that's a painting that I did since I ran out of Sunnyvale Art Club paintings. But hopefully I'll have a new series soon. Sean asked, the intersection of Waddell and Fair Oaks have their traffic lights completely off for the last 2 hours and nobody is there working. What's happening? So definitely, if you see issues in the city, always report them. You can go to Access Sunnyvale and report online. You can call the non-emergency number in this case. If for a traffic light that's out, definitely I followed up, and that was one of the things, that was one of the locations that they had some electrical issues. But if lights are, and just as a reminder to residents, if lights are off at an intersection or if they're flashing, consider that intersection as a four-way stop. So, stop in all directions, yield to other people who get there before you. That's one of the important things that we can't prevent, power outages. And we were fairly lucky. We definitely had a few areas of the city where we'd had some power outages, and I was getting updates from PG&E as far as that's concerned. And one of them almost, over a day, almost 2 days without power. But hopefully PG&E, we've been, from Sunnyvale standpoint, we were pretty lucky. I've heard from other areas where there are multiple days, 3 or 4 days, that I have friends in Los Gatos or up in the Santa Cruz Mountains that it took quite a long time for them to get power restored. Tina asked, I'm writing to address the issue of the crows in downtown Sunnyvale. I'm a resident downtown and I get woke up by the incessant cause every morning starting at 5 a.m. As a shift worker who often has to work late, this constant disruption is starting to affect me. I'm writing for the city to ask for assistance. So the city has restarted the use of green lasers to harass the crows away from downtown. Council also approved increasing spray washing of sidewalks and the streets downtown. Ultimately, we're limited in what we can do, but we're looking at other alternatives, trying to keep the crows away for a little bit as much as we can. We'll see what we can, whether or not that makes any headway as far as that's concerned. But yes, it is a known issue, and hopefully, we can figure out something that will, keep them from being such a nuisance downtown in general. I think that's it for my questions of this week. I don't see any other comments or questions. So let me go ahead and wrap up. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, there's one more question. Hang on. No, that was last week. Okay. Yeah, so let me go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. We still live in uncertain times and rainy weather. New issues always come up, but I want you to know that no matter what challenges we face them together. I'm proud of Sunnyvale and how our residents have responded to, the challenges over the last few years. I'm thankful to everyone who helps out in our community, showing their kindness, showing their generosity. There's a good article about a GoFundMe for one of the unhoused residents that to keep them in a hotel, which was really a great effort for a group within our city. But, your actions and your attitude really do make a difference. We are we're America's happiest city, and that has to do with our residents. Lots more publicity on that over the last few weeks. It's amazing how that story continues to get highlighted. But, Sunnyvale will emerge from the last few years as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. Stay dry. Goodbye.